Alhamdulillah. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Welcome everyone. I think before we begin, Sister Azra, we might have to modify some of the stuff based on attendance.
Yes. So if you can share your screen, Brother Ibrahim, then we can, yeah, I agree with you. We can ask some questions. Generally, we don't need to use the Mentimeter, so not a problem at all.
Definitely. All right, here we go. So this is, start off with slideshow. All right, just Azra, you want to begin or?
Yeah, yes. So Assalamu alaikum. Before we start, we wanted to just ask our audience a couple of questions. Sister Aisha, if you can basically let's introduce ourselves. So before we begin, so that we know our audience. My name is Azra Naqvi, and I'm the principal of Hadith School of Excellence. I have about 19 years of experience in education, and particularly in leadership position as a principal. So I'm very fortunate and happy to be here. Go ahead, Brother Ibrahim.
My name is Ibrahim Yusuf. I'm the principal of Nashville International Academy. I have 6 years of principal experience and 13 years total of being in education, Islamic education namely. And we're here to talk to you today about change and how to manage it and how to lead it. And I'm excited to be here.
Sounds good. One question before we began, we wanted to ask is how does, and I'm just trying to get to that question, but one question is that how do change generally, does not work? How does change, first, how does change not work? Sometimes when we try to implement change and it doesn't go our way. So what is the reason why change sometimes fail? Does anybody want to kind of shout out? Sister Aisha, I don't want to hold you on the spot, but what are your thoughts?
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Well, this year there has been a lot of change at our school. And it was necessary change over the years. However, I have to say, working with, I think a lot of it is trust, and it's been an interesting experience for me as acting principal. We don't have a principal. However, this change has really pushed me out of my comfort zone. And as a leader, I've always been sort of in a dual role, teacher as well as administrator over the years in 2 Islamic schools. But I would say even though there was initial resistance, but the feedback that I've had from my principal teacher meetings have all been very positive, that yes, the change was difficult, but I think with clear communication, with clear vision, and they actually see it working, it has been a good step for our school. But it was risky, it was scary. But I think knowing who you're working with, and then teachers seeing that I'm not just saying things, but I'm actually doing the work. I'm very genuine about it. I care about them, and the school has played a big role in the change management that we've had to do and that we will continue to do next year.
Nice.
And if I could add, when you're asking why it doesn't work, I think it's when there is no trust. As Sister Aisha, she said, trust is so important if you want to take that step and make changes. But having that, if you don't have trust, that's when change doesn't work. If you haven't taken everyone's feedback, then change doesn't work. If everyone doesn't, feel their voices were heard, you haven't done your due diligence and gathered all the data before you make changes. Those are some of the reasons when change doesn't work well.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with both. I think especially in the last 2 years, the rate of change has been just very unprecedented, of course. I know that's a popular word, but it's almost as if we're not biologically wired to adapt to the rate of change that is happening in the more recent years. So as we navigate this changing landscape, continuously changing landscape, yes, absolutely, relationships and trust are key to just helping everyone stick together and work together. Today, when we talk about change, we're talking about a few things. I think one, we're talking about change that happens slowly and gradually, and not just change that suddenly occurs and we have to adapt to it. We're talking about change that we manage, change that we control, change that we orchestrate slowly in an organization. Yes, there will be historical and political situations and economic situations and pandemic situations that would interrupt our management and our efforts towards change. And we will talk a little bit about that. But today, the kind of change we're discussing is the one that you can actually control and manage. And that kind of change happens slowly, right? We can learn a little bit from mushrooms. I like the analogy of mushrooms. Because when mushrooms appear, they don't appear suddenly after a rainy day. Typically, what happens is that there is an underground system of fungus or fungi that has been evolving and growing for years. And the actual mushroom is the flowering bud of that system, of that network. Similarly, if you want to bring about change in your organization, there's a lot of groundwork that happens ahead of time, beforehand. And eventually, if you do the groundwork right, you will start to see those flowering buds here and there. And those flowering buds are successes or victories, are manifestations of the groundwork that you've already put in place. So as we move forward in the presentation, that's one thing I'd like participants to keep in mind, is that you're managing that groundwork, you're creating that system and network of underground kind of, for the lack of a better analogy, the fungi, so that eventually you can see in your environment those flowering buds, inshallah.
So let's move on to the next slide, and we'll go through the objective of why are we here and what are we trying to accomplish in this, the next slide. And then
right.
That's the slide after this.
Learning objectives.
Yes. So go ahead, Brother Ibrahim.
All right, Bismillah. So today, here are some of the learning objectives for today. One, learners, participants will formulate their own definition of change and why change is important. Of course, we see your own definition because change is different for different organizations and different people. So we want you to identify what kind of change is necessary for your organization and why that change is important. You will also understand why change leadership is important, especially in the field of education, and why it's so challenging, given the social landscape that we work in. It's a highly social landscape, and hence why change is complicated, because people are complicated. And then the third objective is to actually look at the change process. The change process, it's, there's a roadmap that you can follow and move from one phase to the next to sort of develop change, bring about change, and sustain it. And finally, we'll also look at how leaders sometimes have their own, personal immunities and resistances to change, and how you have to have the mindset, the biological brain to adapt and change and be flexible, and also just the heart to bear and be patient, and adapt when change is happening. So these are the learning objectives for the day. Inshallah, we will be able to deliver them to all participants. Let's move on to the next slide. All right.
So inshallah, let's talk about the first one. The first objective is what and why change. So before we move on, we wanted to look at the specific quote, and we want to talk about the meaning behind this quote. The alternative to change is not stability, it's destruction. So I want you guys to think about, what does this mean? Think about it and maybe put it in the chat as what do you think about what that really means? So the alternative to change is not stability, it's destruction. So what I want us to do is to think about it for a moment, type your answers, and then let's just post it out together. It's like a teardrop approach. So all of us post the answers together, and then we will kind of go through what is your definition as to what this means. So I'm going to give another 30 seconds, and then we'll all kind of hit enter. So I want to give a chance for you to kind of jot your thoughts, is to say, what is this? What does that really mean? That if there is no change, it's the alternative is not stability, it's destruction. So let's think about that, and let's everyone enter your thoughts.
Yeah, think about the implications. What are the, the connotations, if you will.
So go ahead and type in your chat, what do you think about the implications about if there is no
Sorry.
alternative? Yes.
Trying to find the chat box.
Yeah, I'm checking the chat box. So we can, if you want, we can kind of circle back to this particular, question maybe a little bit later. But I wanted to kind of start off by thinking about the important role as leaders, as we all was discussing about how the leader plays such a significant role. And with the change happening as we advance through this technological era and in this global economy, if you look at the employers, they're demanding the candidates who are entering the workforce to have that knowledge, skills, and habit to really thrive in the 21st century. And hence the job of the school leaders become even more complicated. It becomes daunting, right? And really demanding on us, as one of the most important and significant responsibility of the leader is to continually challenge the status quo, if we may call it, and look for ways for school improvement. When we look at one of the research done by the Wallace Foundation, they said that the principal pipeline, they were studying the principal pipeline, and they determined that the most significant improvement in students' learning is done through leadership. So leadership is the key for the schools. So when we think about that, the qualification of a leader requires that he or she is having that transformation mindset, and that can really be a change agent to the school. And I like to think about like an analogy of a plane, where is one of the Warner's who Tony Wagner is one of the educationalists who really talks about like a comparison of a plane. He compares a school leader job to rebuilding an airplane where you are flying it. As change happening, you are being able to implement a change while school is running. So we need to be adaptive and be responsive to the different dynamic of the school. And of course, the COVID pandemic has really given us that test, right? And the evolving, the unpredictability and the implications for the change, the multiple unknowns that we were faced as we just went through a year or two of the pandemic. And it really gives us an understanding and the multi-dimensions of the issue and the crisis that we face. So that the leaders is an important job that we need to look at and be a great change agent. Let's go on to the next slide.
Before we move
Yes,
on, Sister Azra,
Okay.
I noticed that
Yes,
we have new people just joined the presentation.
okay.
And I just to quickly summarize, today's meeting or today's presentation is about the kind of change that you want to bring about in your school. We will discuss the sudden and change, the sudden historical changes or situations and political situations that might force you to change, like pandemics, like the election of, an Islamophobe. All of these situations definitely require you to change. But what we're discussing is the kind of change that you can manage in your organizations to bring about some kind of improvement, some kind of enhancement. All of the change that we're discussing today and presenting is concerned with enhancement and improvement. It's not just change for change's sake. It's not change to just find an alternative way to do things. It's all of the change that we're talking about today is concerned with improvement. And that's the presentation that we're talking about today. Before we move on, I'd like to bring up just a verse in the Quran that talks about change and the kind of change that we're concerned with today, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, لا يغير الله ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. That Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change the condition within themselves. Now, we often refer to this ayah when we're having discussions about societal ills. A lot of times we attribute the ills in the Muslim world to ills within ourselves, right? And we say, God will not change our state until we change ourselves. And it's often a sentiment that you hear. But the change that we're talking about is not just concerned with bad situations, right? So even if someone is pretty good, they can still be 100% amazing, right? We're saying that even if when it comes to improvement, you do not improve the conditions and you do not improve your situations until you improve that which is within yourself, within your organizations. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hopefully, will bring about changes and improvements if you take those necessary steps. So why is change important? Why is the alternative destruction? I saw someone mention it in the chat, summarize it, Sister Esma. With no change, a person or institute may become obsolete. Yeah, we have to adapt, we have to change, we have to continuously keep improving our situations. And as leaders, you guys are the stewards of that improvement, right? That's your aim. All of the prophets that came, they came to improve the situation of people, right? And the legacy of our Prophet ﷺ was also a legacy of enhancing the world and changing it and making it a better world. So this is why change is necessary, because it's always concerned with improving the situations of people and the conditions of people. All right, let's move on.
So as we talked about, the change is necessary. But then let's talk about what makes change leadership important and challenging. What makes it so hard? I've heard the message that says people resist change. And I think it's not the resisting of change, it's the resisting of loss. So people really resist change because they resist the loss that comes in when there is a change. there's a fear of losing control. There is a possibility of the uncertainty, the getting that one person out of that comfort zone, getting ourselves out of that comfort zone really is difficult, and that is challenging, and that's, you know, daunting. It's basically means that the loss of power, because someone who, you know, a teacher who we ask to, who is comfortable with being a sage on the stage, for example, and being able to teach direct instructions, and we all of a sudden want that teacher to have a different approach, an adaptive approach, where the teacher has to be a facilitator and a guide instead of just being, so that requires that all of a sudden the teacher from an expert to a novice, which is a loss, all of a sudden a chance to basically abandoning the old ways of doing it. So change is difficult, change is hard, not only for the teachers, but for the leaders. And it's, change is also meaning the inconsistency, right? People like to have consistency in their life. Change meaning there's inconsistencies. So there's, you know, for example, I mean, even for the people who are reasonable, intelligent people who fall victim to things like heart disease or some sort of diseases that we face, because it is difficult to change if they were, for example, you know, smoking or drinking, for example. So change is hard if you ask them to change something, even though it is up to that live or die situation. Going to the next point.
Before we move on, Sister Azra.
Okay.
Another thing that makes change leadership very important is that as change leaders, you guys have to, we have to sort of transcend the current reality and what's going on, and sort of assess the immediate needs and aspirations of the community, of our constituents. No matter what the context seems to be, you have to be able to step outside of it and determine what is the best course of action here, regardless of given the historical context, given the social context. What is the best thing to do for my constituents? And I like the story. A great analogy can be drawn from the Industrial Revolution here in the United States. 150 years ago, at a time when industrial workers were being exploited for their physical labor, you know, they were working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, and they were only getting paid like $75 a day. I mean, 75 cents a day. They were getting paid less than $1 a day. A man by the name of Henry Ford, he realized, so he had to sort of transcend this reality, and he realized that in a growing industrial society, the working conditions of the people had to improve. They had to be treated better. They had to be treated differently. And that's the only way that the American industrial sector would experience affluence and success and more productivity. And so he did. He started paying his workers $5 a day. He shortened the day to 8 hours a day. And as a result, production doubled. He attracted better, you know, the best and the brightest, so to speak. And he actually became a model. Ford, the Ford company back then, became a model for all other industrial corporations. So change is not an inconvenience from your vantage point as a leader. Change sometimes is a necessity, even if your people don't realize it. Even if your people don't know that they have to change, and your constituents don't understand and may feel uncomfortable, or you have to sort of become that steward of the change. Own it. Be flexible, be adaptable, and realize that this is necessary. We have to do this because, you know, if we don't, things will not fulfill their entire potential. Things will not get better. People will suffer. So that's why change leadership is important, because another reason you have to, you know, transcend your reality and see what's immediately necessary.
I love your point, Brother Ibrahim, because realizing the change is necessary, the change leader would have to really help the people navigate through those changes, right? Being able to assess, manage, and really provide that context. And what are the losses? Almost like conservation, to say that what are the things that are essential and must be preserved during the time of the change and moving forward, and what are the things that must be given up to or to move forward. So being a leader, being an adaptive leader, those are the kind of things that a leader must really have that foresight and be able to work with the student, with their teachers. The next there's a book that I want to recommend. It's called it's an adaptive leadership book. And this book is written by Hertz and I think Donald is, and I love the fact that he provided this book, has given some tools and strategies that will really help us to understand how does adaptive leadership, what is it and how does it affect change. He defines adaptive leadership as the act of mobilizing a group of individuals who can really handle those tough, challenging situations and emerge successful. And really the leaders need to adapt that to the strategies and techniques to overcome challenges, and the capacity to find out the kinds of losses that are at stake here, as I was mentioning before. So, Brother Hibam, you want to chime in here?
Yes, I recently actually bought this book after Sister Azra recommended it, and I was just skimming through it. And
hello, did I?
I'm sorry, Sister Azra. Yes.
Hello.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I think
can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yeah, you were cutting off for a little bit, but we can hear you now. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Bismillah. Sister Azra, did you want to talk about the difference between technical problems and adaptive challenges?
This is perfect because I think she's having technical problems.
Yeah. All right, we'll give her a moment. Oh, I think we lost her. She has to probably reconnect.
You were actually in the middle of a thought, I think, Ibrahim.
Yeah. So this book does draw, it explains the difference between adaptive challenges and technical problems. And one of the ideas that it uses to illustrate this difference is about the difference between a typewriter and a computer. So the typewriter used, it's sort of, it had certain technicalities behind it. It was a certain technology, and it solved the problem of printing, but it was the same kind of knowledge that they used. They used the knowledge of the printing press, where there's ink and there's metal, and you strike on a piece of paper to leave an impression of that, print or that those metal keys. So any technical problem that you have to solve, you typically rely on existing bodies of knowledge to solve that problem. You have the knowledge. There's literature. There's a precedent. There's a history. And one example, of course, of a technical problem in schools is, let's say, curriculum, right? So there's a lot of curriculum out there. We know we have an idea about what is a good curriculum and what are the components of good curriculum. So if you have a problem in school, a curriculum problem in school, that's a technical problem. You have an existing body of knowledge, a lot of literature, a lot of theories to go by to sort of solve your problem. Now, so the typewriter used existing knowledge for them to come up with it. But when they invented the computer, on the other hand, that required a whole new body of knowledge, completely new body of knowledge. It wasn't the same knowledge and technicalities of a typewriter or a printing press. You know, for the computer, you were striking on keys and somehow digitally they appear on a screen. It was completely new knowledge that they constructed, they formulated. All adaptive challenges requires learning, and it requires the construction of new knowledge. How do you construct new knowledge? Well, that's a human ability. You know, we use all of our learning and all of our emotions and our brain to construct knowledge. We use all of the ideas. We bring so many ideas to the construction process, right? We bring history, experience, degrees, emotions, right? Even our faith, we bring it to the construction process. But it always requires some kind of a construction of new knowledge to solve and meet those adaptive challenges. The pandemic was a perfect example. None of us had ever gone through a pandemic. And suddenly we had to take what we know about learning, what we know about student engagement, what we know about active learning and listening, and we had to digitize it. You know, we had to construct ways to deliver knowledge to students and create a sense of community online. And we had to adapt overnight. That was an adaptive challenge. Another adaptive challenge is, well, there's a lot of adaptive challenges in education. Education itself is 130 years old. The entire system that we use, the model that we use, is still 130 years old. So, you know, how do you create a new model and adapt to the 21st century and adapt to the growing pressures on our children? There's a lot of adaptive challenges in education, and that's something we can start discussing, inshallah, now. I think in the next few slides. Sister Azra, did you want to chime in about this?
Sure. I mean, I'm glad that we talked about technical and adaptive challenges, because I think it really helps us as leaders to understand what challenges are we facing, and kind of organize our solutions and our locus of control or based on that. Because if it's technical challenge, then we know that we can use authority because everything is laid out. There's an instruction manual there for someone to follow, so that they can do their job. But if there is a concern, then if they are not followed, then we can use authority. But for adaptive challenge, it's much more about, there is no easy solution, right? There's a trial and error. There's a environment where we all are learning, including the leader, including the people who are on the floor. So we need to kind of look into that and then design our solution based on that. One of the examples that I want to give is my own example. As a leader, we've called the personalized learning approach in our school. And I want to give an example of that and how does technical and adaptive kind of come into play. Implementing a problem or implementing a program like this, for initial to be successful, it requires certain conditions and certain things like the time and space that are technical issues. So for example, in order for us to implement the personalized learning model, I had to go ahead and do some modification to master schedule, for example, to accommodate, and so redesigning the classroom, for example, to allow the flexible seating, for example. So those are all part of the change process that is more technical because it's easily done. It requires actually going in there and doing those changes. However, adaptive changes is a whole different ballgame because it requires the change in the hearts and minds of the people who are going to be able to implement that. So it requires that training, it requires that buy-in. it requires the teachers to really understand how to navigate those changes once the master schedule is modified, for example. Because like I said, however, the adaptive change requires the giving up the old ways in the classroom and starting the new ways to be able to implement. And that is a more like a disruption to the old ways of thinking and learning. So, and again, the thing is that if we do that, if we were to implement a program and apply a technical difficulty, a technical challenge, you
Mr. Azra, we lost you again. Okay. Apologize about that. She spoke about one of her adaptive challenges. For me, what I think is an adaptive challenge in education.
Hello.
Yes, Sister Azra.
Sorry about that. No, go ahead. I'm not sure my internet, I apologize, my internet is not going through, but yeah, I was just going to say that we need to do it. My train of thought, but I was trying to say is that if you were to implement an adaptive challenge, a change in our school, we need to do it through commitment, and it cannot be through compliance or fear. Because if we were to do that, then our teachers might implement that for now, but they might go back to their old ways. So we need to be able to change their hearts and mind. We need to be able to convince and have that buy-in and really think about the human side of things, and to deal with that through empathy and compassion in order for the adaptive challenge to really take place. So I think that is more important for the leader to understand the difference between the technical and adaptive challenge. Brother Ibrahim, you were going to say something.
I was thinking that one of the adaptive challenges that we face in education is the very complex and toxic social environment that our kids are growing up in, especially online. You know, I know that schools, we have to do it all, especially Islamic schools. You know, the amount of responsibilities and problems and issues that we have to address is not like the challenges and the problems and issues that public schools and even charter schools have to address. I think faith-based schools are concerned with way more issues, and we have so many priorities, right? So how do we help our kids navigate this very toxic and unhealthy online social environment, right? And the normalizing of things. And, is that our responsibility? Do we formulate a model, an education model, to help our kids, navigate this environment? That's one of the adaptive challenges. Now, like I said earlier, so in order to construct that model, you have to bring in, you have to bring in not existing models, because that's more of a technical thing. Okay, we have character education out there. We have different curriculum for SEL. You can't just import it into your school. I mean, you can, but if you really want to meet the needs of your constituents and help students, Muslim kids, truly embody and live their faith as they grow up in this environment, you have to bring in this literature and your experience and and hadith and Quran, and construct, a model that works for them, a model that would help them navigate this environment. That's an adaptive challenge for me, right? And that's not easy. There's no existing. There is, but you have to construct out of small pieces, individual things. You have to construct that model. So that's all I wanted to say, just about what I consider as an adaptive challenge. And that's something we're working on here at our school through a homegrown SEL program with 4 core values that are entirely rooted in the faith, in our deen, in the CISNA, in the Quran. And that model the pandemic kind of derailed us a little bit, especially our, social emotional learning and character education, that got derailed. But we're picking it back up, alhamdulillah. And I think we'll talk about the different phases of change, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about how we went through the phases developing this model and other models. All right, Bismillah. Okay. Sister Azra, you want to? This is about, I know we said breakout rooms, but we could probably stay in one room maybe if you want.
I think so. I think that's a good idea. Maybe what we can do is, because we wanted to make this as a dialogue, we wanted to involve the participant as well. So let's kind of ask this question and see if a participant would like to join in and say, based on what we discussed just now, what are your questions? From your vantage point in the classroom, what do you see the greatest challenge that you or your colleagues face related to the improving your systems in your school? So what number one problem that you face today? And what are some of the organization changes required to solve that problem? So I'm wondering, based on the technical and adaptive discussion that we had, what are challenges that you face that and you feel that this is either adaptive or technical? So either you can unmute and shout out, or you can put it in the chat. Just kind of an idea about what are you facing, what are your challenges right now? That you're probably implementing a program, an initiative that you're the process that you're in, and that you wanna look into. How's that helping you understand? Is it a technical or is it a adaptive challenge?
Assalamu alaikum. This is Farhanaz. Thank you so much, Brother Ibrahim and Azra, for such a wonderful training. And it totally resonates, whatever you're saying, the change management and us adapting to the changes is just struck a chord in me. From my vantage point, that our school, or especially me as the leadership team, struggling with is still the age-old issue that principals have always faced in Islamic schools, which is the board and the school leadership relationship. And how do you navigate through this difficult terrain? Everybody's an expert in their own capacity, and board members, again, they're wonderful individuals. They have tremendous expertise in their own fields, but when they don't communicate enough to the school leadership and just how to manage and navigate through, that terrain has been a challenge for our school team. And when you say change, there has been change leadership for us in the sense that I have new team members as well. Similarly, there is change in the board also. So every person brings their own viewpoint, their own vision. So I think for us, it's more adaptive. And I think we're trying to work as a team, trying to, have increase more meetings between different team members. And so that is how, so that there's more dialogue. And that is how we are trying to, engage everybody and keep moving forward in the way we should be moving forward as a school.
I would personally consider that a technical problem, because there is an existing body of knowledge, ways to overcome this, dichotomy, the tension or the disagreement. One, I think, body of knowledge is, of course, always handbook, right? A handbook, a policy handbook that outlines the roles of the board members and their relationship to the principal. This governing policy book should be read and understood and reviewed by the board members. All new board members should be inducted into the board. And that induction should involve a training on the policies, a review of the policies. And whenever there's an issue, this policy handbook must sort of predict and try to anticipate all of these issues, whether it's reporting a grievance, whether it's decision making, whether try to anticipate all the possible issues that could come out and agree on a set of policies to govern this relationship. That's one. Another thing is a strong vision. I think if we all understand where we're going and what we're trying to do and why our organization exists, I think maybe board president should always keep that at the forefront and highlight what is it that really matters at the end of the day. And that's another, I mean, I don't know, maybe I could be wrong, but I always feel like this board and principal relationship could be solved with, just good policies. Allahu alam.
What I think is, like you said, Brother Rahim, it could be a technical challenge, but it could also be an adaptive challenge. It could also be an adaptive challenge if we were to say that the same policies may be requiring to change in order for a specific initiative to be adapted. And at that situation, there could be some struggle between what the board is what you as a principal wanting to implement and what the board is resisting. So there could be some resistance there, and sometimes we are hired from the board as a change agent, right? But sometimes when there is situations where the status quo is there and where the people are already comfortable with the process that is going on. And when we ask for a change, that is uncomfortable for people to adapt to that kind of change. So that could still be an adaptive change because you as a leader need to know how to work. You are basically like a sandwich in between, because you have the board to convince and to be able to work with them, but also you have the people who are under you and who trust you and who believe in you, and you need to be able to fulfill their promises. So there is kind of that tug of war and tension between you are in the middle. So that's, I think, is an adaptive challenge that the principals usually face, especially in the forefront of change.
Definitely. Before we take another, challenge, idea, or concern, recently I heard this very powerful statement by a family counselor. She said that in a social environment, in an organization or in a family, sometimes you can't change everyone, right? You can't really change everyone. But if you choose one person, and change that one person in an ecosystem, that could help actually change the entire ecosystem, subhanAllah. And I think as principals, we have to play that role sometimes. We have to be that person, have, big hearts and a huge emotional bandwidth to handle these issues and handle these problems, and yeah, maybe change so as to keep the ecosystem healthy and stable. Allahu alam.
Yeah, and I think that if we, that's true, we need to stand up. We are there to kind of, change that ecosystem, and knowing us to be that, we are in the forefront, right? I think it's best to find allies, right? It's best to, if there is a change that you want to implement, to be able to look around and be able to talk to the people and the constituents and talk to them and see what they're saying and what they're saying about change, and really communicate the challenge that you're facing, and basically showing that urgency, the need for change, and so that they can rally with you when you're ready to implement and to propose the change, inshallah. So yeah, and I think that, yeah, so maybe we can.
Would anybody else like to share, maybe?
Yes.
Feel free to unmute or type up in the chat box anything you think, any challenges from your vantage point that you think is the greatest challenge that you face as a leader, or that your school must adapt, must do, all in relation to improvement, by the way. So this entire conversation, every time we mention change, it implies improvement. It's not just to find an alternative way or your way. It's concerned with finding a solution that improves or enhances something, or adapting an initiative that enhances something.
Assalamualaikum. So
Alaikum salam.
an example that comes to mind for me this year in particular, after the year and a half of COVID, and we did some training during the summer about how students are going to be needing a lot of hand holding with social interaction because they've been cooped up at home. And so all that training gave me the impression that, you know, we're going to have a smooth beginning of school year. And so my school is a middle school, high school, and it was the exact opposite. And what we found was we needed to change our quickly change our not policies, but more of attitude towards what's actually going on with students and what their needs are. And they were very different than our expectation. And what we also saw, and we needed to adapt and still continue to, is the challenge of them being on social media and having so much baggage from where they came from. So many came from the public school system this year, because in our area, the public school system has failed them quite a bit. So, you know, you have a school culture plan in the beginning of the school year, and you just have to throw that out the window totally and readjust what's going on social media. What are some of the challenges? What are they watching? What are some of the challenges that people are posing or teens posing for each other to try at school? And then, you know, you're playing catch up and almost needing someone in the inside from the student body to tell you what's going on. Oh, there's a new challenge of this, that, and the other, and you have to kind of, you know, adjust your school culture. So to me, that still remains a very big challenge. It's more operational than it is on a you know, board level or visionary level, but it does drive policy. And a lot of times you have to kind of readjust how you're going to do that.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And your concern is a shared concern. I think a lot of schools are grappling with how do we help students regain some social competence after being isolated for so many, you know, months. And like I said, there is a body of literature that you can borrow from to come up with your own solution based on the needs of your community. And that literature, a lot of the research about building social competence is actually character education literature, because if you're educating them, if you're working on their character is what they stand for, what is important to them. It's value centric, right? And if you're working on their internal self, what they stand for, their values, then eventually it should show up in their behaviors and in their actions. There's even a hadith about the Prophet ﷺ, where whenever he looked at himself in the mirror, he would say, Allahumma hassanta khalqi fahassin khuluqi. Oh Allah, you have beautified my appearance, my physical appearance. Please beautify my inner appearance, like what I stand for. So character education is entirely concerned with the internal values that students come to embody. That's one. So have a value-centric approach to character education. Two, you need rituals or routines within your school day that are managed and that allow students to mingle in a supervised way, and that are structured to build social skills. So one of the popular routines out there is something called morning meeting. Students gather together in a circle, they greet one another, they share something about themselves, they complete an activity together, and finally they read a message for the day, and they reflect on the message and they discuss the message. It's very structured, 4 steps, it's done every day. It's a ritual. So what that means is that eventually a culture would evolve, right? A very positive culture would evolve among students. So rituals, value-centric, and honestly, one of the most important things that's important to me is relationships with teachers, the climate of the school, and how teachers treat kids, how they discipline kids. If that is not present that translates to no role models. We do not have, the kids don't have adult role models in their lives to show them compassion, to show them flexibility, you know, and that becomes a problem. So I think those three things could be brought to your school to create a program, a solution that would help you meet those challenges. And of course, it can't happen all at once and overnight. We'll discuss that in the phases of change. You have to have the patience and the bandwidth to bring about and sequence that change and pace it, eventually, slowly, until you start seeing manifestations of it. Nothing happens overnight. Like we said at the beginning, we're learning from mushrooms, right? Mushrooms appear from a system of underground fungus that have been there and growing underground for years. That's when mushrooms appear, after years of groundwork. So we'll look at the phases, inshallah, next. Sister Azra, do you want to take another example, maybe?
Yeah. Then let's move on to the next slide. I'm just looking at the time. It's about an hour. So let's move on to the next slide. Maybe we can discuss more through the phases of the change.
All right.
So the next, I'm not sure if you've changed the slide. I think my internet is really bothering me, but I apologize. If you're on the next slide, I think one of the things we wanted to talk about right now are the phases of the change, because that kind of gives us an idea about how, and this is, you know, how change takes place. And Tony Wagner and Robert Kagan are pioneers in, you know, providing solutions and giving us strategies for the change. And the book, I strongly recommend you to read Change Leadership, A Practical Guide to Transforming Our Schools. And this book really helps you to navigate the process of the change, beginning from the preparing to envisioning and to enacting. It just gives you an idea of this, when the change, when you implement the change, which is the end, but before implementing the change, what are the different areas that a principal or the leader goes through in order for the successful implementation to take place. So, so I think that is something that I recommend. So if you go to the next slide.
Yes, one thing about this book, by the way, before we move on, is that it is entirely concerned with instructional improvement. In fact, the entire premise of the book is that if you're going to change anything in your school, if you're going to improve anything in your school, let it be instructions, let it be instructional improvement. That's the premise of this book. So if instruction is an issue at your school, and of course it's always an issue, it's always, you know, you're always bringing new teachers in, your teachers get comfortable. Instructions is always a worthy domain to improve every year, right?
Okay.
Just as you want me to talk about these phases?
Well, yeah, we've kind of through these are the three phases. Maybe the next slide might give you I don't know if you've.
Okay.
See, I'm not able to see if you actually changed the slide.
Okay. So, so here we have the three phases of change: initiation, envisioning, and implementation and enacting. These phases, we're going to talk about each phase, but these phases by no means are isolated phases, right? It doesn't mean that you finish one phase and at the very end of that phase, you know, you move on to the next phase and you're done with the first phase or the previous phase. It's a very cyclical process. They overlap and intertwine, and you might find yourself currently in phase 3. You're probably implementing something at your school, and a lot of schools do that. You know, they immediately go into implementation, but they're still doing some of the activities and the behaviors involved in initiation and envisioning. But understanding the phases of change would help the leader sequence and stage the change, right? Because you are the orchestrator. You got to orchestrate the change. And these will help you sort of understand where you are in trying to implement something and trying to bring some kind of program or trying to create an initiative, right? And it could be anything. It could be instructional, it could be character, it could be environmental, it could be something to do with operations and tuitions. But, you know, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, this should help you sequence and stage your change, okay?
Yeah, so, right, so like Brother Brahim says, it is a cyclical process, meaning that if you are starting a change, envisioning and implementing, that doesn't really mean that you are going in a sequence. If you find that you want to implement a change, and you might find that you can actually have someone do a pilot program, because as we've noticed, and I've always wanted to be able to make sure that if we are going to implement a major initiative, you want to first start off with a one classroom, maybe a program that you want to implement, maybe one of the teacher who has already implemented in her previous school that she probably had implemented. So you might want to think about having her implement the program. Maybe in the initial stage, you may find her maybe implementing that process and learn from that particular classroom. What works really well. Hadi School, we've implemented the Leader in Me program a couple of years ago, and we've right now we've implemented, we've achieved the lighthouse status. But when we first started the program, we didn't start it until we actually had entire school ready to implement. But before that, we found a teacher who planned to read a book about the Leader in Me, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey book. So we started off by her starting certain nuggets in her classroom where she first of all read the book. So the book that she went through, she started to basically have a book study in the school where she started to implement in the classroom, but also have that book study for other teachers. So the other teacher starts reading the book and being able to kind of implement some of the strategies that were in the book. So empowering for example, the leadership team that we have is empowerment of the students. So basically, for example, having the leadership jobs in our class, in our schools. And so a different way of doing things. And it's one of the character education that we follow. And it started with initiation, but it also has to be organic. An organic change really meaning that horizontal accountability, the vertical accountability, that all of it in together rather than the vertical where it's only top down. So going back to, but we still need to know the stages of the change. In order for us to be able to understand where we are in the cyclical process, we still need to know what are the different stages and what does that look like. So for example, the specific change initiative, the phase 1 is the initiating or the preparing stage. And according to Wagner, this particular change requires the people to, again, like I was mentioning, it has to go with the hearts and mind of the people. It has to be involving the key stakeholders of your school. Before you go to the vast masses, you want to first identify who are the ones who are, for example, the lead teacher, like I said, be able to have that buy-in from them. But not only that, we as a leader have to identify and really show the urgency using the data that we have. In our school, we talked about something, one of the things that I was mentioning about the process of personalized learning. In order for us to even get that started, we had many data-driven meetings with our key stakeholders. We looked at data, the MAP data, we looked at the alumni data, we looked at the surveys that we took from parents, students, teachers, and we realized with the group that yes, change is, we need to be able to implement a model that is much more progressive. And hence we've implemented that program, the initiative, the what we call the initiation, the preparing stage. And yeah, of course, when we prepare or initiate a program, there has to be resistance, because we need to look at what we call the, what Tony Wagner calls living in the disequilibrium. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide, but I'm wondering, Brother Ibrahim, do you have something to kind of chime into that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sister Azra. This first phase of change, preparing, like Sister Azra mentioned, it does happen a lot in the head and the hearts of people, right? Including the leader himself or herself. I'm gonna use, I think Sister Aisha, I believe it was Sister Aisha who mentioned the, was her Sister Esma, one of our participants who talked about social competence.
I think Sister Aisha, but yeah.
Sister Aisha. So Sister Aisha, now she recognizes an urgency in her community that has to do with social competence and relationships. That is part of the initiation phase, is the leader herself understanding that, okay, we need to change something here. There is an urgency. This really is important to me as a leader, and I need to do something about it, right? That's part of the initiation phase. It's happening in your heart, it's happening in your head. Now, why do you see this urgency? You noticed something. You noticed something. You can go with your observations, right? But to actually, drive it home, the authors of a lot of the literature say that you need the data. You need to back it up. You need to show people somehow how do you know this is happening? Okay. So your data could be instances of office referrals, for instance, right? Social problems in the school. I know that some schools, I think somewhere in the West, in Seattle, maybe, they closed down entire districts because of social problems, right? So you can, office referrals, that's your piece of data. You could say we had an increase in office referrals because of fights, or because of boy-girl problems, or because of social issues, right? There's an urgency. This is also part of the preparation phase. But to really generate momentum, you need to communicate a strong why, a strong purpose behind why you need to actually address this problem. And as Islamic schools, sometimes it's very clear for us, right? Why? Our why is clear, in any given moment, and for any given program and initiative, we have that sense of serviceship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have that sense of legacy that we owe it to our future generations, right? Islam itself is intergenerational, right? All of our teachings, all of the lessons that we want to pass on to our children, that's our why. Our deen is our why, and you just have to streamline it and hone it and package it in a way that specifically addresses or specifically is connected to this issue. So you personally, you believe in it. You communicate a strong why. You have some data to back it up, right? And then part of this stage, this initiation stage, is thinking about accountability. Okay, how am I going to hold people accountable to this, right? How am I going to make sure that people are implementing this idea? Or, you want to start thinking about that as well. A lot of it is happening in your head. You don't want to develop fat plans, as they call them, right? You don't want to develop dense plans, 14-page document about your initiative, right? You can have it written somewhere, but what you need to focus on is actually some practical steps that you can start taking, and just have a good idea about what you need to do, the data to back it up, and how you're going to hold people accountable. That's the most important parts of this phase, the initiation phase. Is there anything else, Sister Azra? We can move on. Bismillah.
I was just saying, I think I just had my muted, but I was just saying that, part of the phase one is when we, as you were talking about, Brother Ibrahim, about the different challenges that we are facing, that we face when we are thinking about an adaptive change. And we're thinking about the change that's about to be implemented, and how do we navigate our, the teachers. And we have to realize that there is a tendency, there is a component of change leadership that recognizes that there is a process or almost like a phase that we go through that's called, according to the book, called the zone of uncertainty, which is the loss and discomfort, right? Again, backing back to where we're talking about change, we're talking about that discomfort. And I really like how this diagram was presented about, that shows us that the people sometimes have to make some difficult decisions and trade-offs during this stage. And Hibbs, according to Hibbs, the adaptive leadership author, says that it is the level of discomfort sometimes is too far below the threshold. And when the level of discomfort is too much below the threshold, that's the time when the organization and the people become complacent to success. They become they become lethargic, right? Because there is no movement. However, if the zone of this, disequilibrium, which he calls it, is over the limit, people become the uncomfortable. They become discomfort. The discomfort happen with the current system, and then the change is inevitable. So the leaders must really diagnose that capacity to find out where are we in this level, where are we in this disequilibrium, and be able to manage and assess, and then being able to look at the situation and just basically keep the ball rolling, basically keep the threshold, keep the situation above the threshold, where we call the zone of discomfort. I like how Anthony Muhammad had mentioned in his speech about the collective teacher efficacy. And that's by John Hadi. And what he mentioned is that there are really the power to produce a desired results are divided into two different categories. And one is the discontent into the people, and the second is dissatisfaction. And what he says is that discontent is where the people are aware that there is a problem. People know that the needs have to happen, but don't move forward or don't do anything about it, which is basically the stage of the complexity. And then the next stage is, which is dissatisfaction. And here, where the people at that time, when we look at the change, we decided that we cannot stay where we are, and change has to happen. And that is what we need, our articulation of the mission and vision. Our understanding has to be delivered and articulated to the community, or to the people, to the teachers, so that they understand that the change is needed.
Speaking of this productive zone, I think one of the things I would advise is that until you begin to see those blossoming, mushrooms in your environment and moments of success. And by the way, if I may just add, on your way to, when you're trying to achieve a vision or a goal, visions are never things that are in the distant future, and one day you will arrive at that place and experience happiness and success and dramatic change. That's not how visions work. I think visions come up and appear on your way to that end. They come up in the form of milestones and small victories on the road, right? But until then, until you start seeing victories and your vision starts coming to life and change starts happening here and there, one of the things I always keep in mind is that learning needs to be happening. Your constituents learn their way to change. they learn their way to implementation. They learn their way through this environment that might be uncomfortable sometimes. As long as they're learning, I think inshallah one day that learning would come to life and they would start applying what they've learned. Just wanted to add that. All right, next step here. Successes and indicators that the initiation phase had been successful. What are the indicators that you have succeeded at this phase, this initiation and preparing phase? Sister Azra, did you want to cover this slide?
Yeah. Well, as we talked about, if we are showing that compelling data to our constituents, if we were to come up with that vision and mission, and be able to articulate that to our, to our teachers, and once the creating that urgency, once that momentum is there, we know that we have initiated that process, because we need to, again, as we're mentioning, to be able to going into the hearts and minds of the people and really having them to understand and agree with and believe in it. So the compliance and force is not going to work. It's more of being able to engage with you and being able to understand your journey, and they will rally towards you when you understand, when you are able to articulate that journey. So I think if we were to find ourselves having that data and being able to successfully create some in the committee, for example, and involve the key stakeholders and be able to communicate the key stakeholders about the urgency of the matter, and them together creating the goals and vision and mission, that happened, then you know that you are on your way to that initiation stage and moving on to the next stage, which is the enacting stage.
I'm just reminded of a good example. Recently, Yaqeen Institute, they published a study a few years ago about the, and this is a form of data, right? So they did the research and they published their research about the impact that Islamophobia has had on our youth, right? And in that study, they realized that Islamophobia creates feelings of inferiority about being Muslim, and maybe feelings of alienation from Islam. And this is, of course, sometimes we have an intuitive grasp of this and we know it, but you come across this data and you want to now address it. You want to use it. This is compelling, and you need a plan to maybe use this data and create a sense of urgency. And of course, one of the first things that come to mind if I hear that, when I hear that kind of information, is that, all right, we need to create a safe and welcoming environment for all Muslim children, right? We need to create an inclusive environment for all Muslim children, where no matter where they come from, what color skin they might have, this is their safe haven. This is their place. So suddenly now you have a vision about safety, and inclusion. And that appeals to the human side of things. You convince people by connecting everything to the humanity of your effort, the humanity side of your vision. And you publish it. You publish it in your newsletters, video recordings. You talk about it during open houses and town houses, and that's part of the preparation cycle and initiation cycle. You're just bringing it to light, and you're creating momentum, and you're starting that head-to-hand continuum, right? It starts in the level of the head, then the heart, and eventually you see it in the hands. Basically, you see actions being taken. Right.
So we're going to go to the next phase. Once you know that you have created that vision and created that urgency, our next phase is phase 2, which is the envisioning stage. And in this envisioning stage, that's the opportunity for you to now involve the wider community and to create that masses of, communicate that to the teachers, parents, and community members who really understands the need for that change, and really establishing that, for example, the school-wide goals and strategies, for example, and to really focus on improving this teachings and learning, like Brother Ibrahim was saying, that we as schools, our main goal really should be the improvement of teaching and learning. And I think our initiative that revolves around that really speaks to that hearts and mind of not only the teachers, but the parents and students and community members, because ultimately that's our goals and vision and mission. And then once that foundation is laid out, we look at our the accountability piece. We want to make sure that we have the accountability for the teachers and the students and the parents laid out, and that there's a certain level of trust that is there, that this vision, this new strategy, this goal is going to be implemented, and then we all are involved. Maybe creating focus groups and maybe creating committees to do that would be helpful to involve the community. For example, I'm just thinking about the change that we've implemented in our school, the personalized learning model that we've implemented. One of the things we did once we have, first of all, involved in the initiation stage, the key stakeholders, and once we have created that momentum, we had to involve the rest of the parents and the community members. We did multiple workshops where we invited the parents, every classroom by classroom, and had went through the presentation about why this change is necessary. And we did what we called a workshop session where all the teachers, also all the parents were involved, and it was basically giving themselves certain questions, and all of the parents were involved in taking apart our vision, talking about how can we make sure the students are successful in the 21st century. And we had the big flip charts out, and the momentum was there when we can see everyone giving a dialogue, everyone involved in that process. And that shows you that, okay, now the entire community is involved, that yes, this is something we are looking for. And we also want them to ask some critical questions. This is the time, because you rather want to make sure that there's an arena to discuss challenges and concerns and be able to articulate that to them, rather than later on when they're in the parking lot. So you want to be able to have that dialogue, and this is the stage where you want to create that momentum. And so I think that is some of the important parts. Brother Ibrahim, what do you think about that? And do you have any example that you want to present today?
No, I think, yeah, the envisioning phase, like you said, there's a lot of education happening, a lot of learning happening, a lot of conversations happening, workshops, flip charts, training, and you're basically preparing the whole system for change, right? And that, I think that gets to the. I'm sorry, was there a question?
Yes.
No, okay. Let's see.
Okay, so yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So next, I think I'm just wanted to say our next slide kind of expands on the phase 2. So I want to just kind of talk about that slide, because it kind of talks about, again, back to the adaptive challenge. So our adaptive challenge is because it's more complex and requires the human dimension, and failure to take this account of the human side really results in low implementation. And I want to talk about the who and the how and the or why, how and the who, because this is something that is kind of rationale versus resistance, and that's something that actually was presented by Brother Anthony Muhammad in the presentation last week, and he talked about that every individual in the community of school needs to be able to have the answer to these three questions, which is the why and the who, how and the who. Why is, again, as we talked about, why? The cognitive question is, why is the change important? And you as a leader have to articulate that. And that's, again, the part of this phase 2 is to make sure that we are communicating. And we just said that before, that we need to communicate that to the constituents. If you cannot convince that, you cannot find that rally. So as a leader, you have to be excellent communicator. The second one is the how. And that calls for the competency, because the leaders or the people who are around you must know that you are competent enough to be able to present that you are an effective leader. And that is important, that you have that ability and the ownership and the confidence to implement the change. But I think all that is important, but what is most important is the who. And that is rallying around what we call the trust factor. And Brother Ibrahim, I know that you were going to talk about the trust factor, because if the community doesn't trust you, everything, the why and the how doesn't matter, because it's the trust that's more important. It's the human side. The managing the human side is the most important. So Brother Ibrahim, you want to take that? Who?
Sure, yes. I think for people to trust you, first they have to first come to perceive that you have integrity. That's very important. And integrity, of course, is something earned, right? Over the years, you have to sort of do what you say you're going to do. You have to show competence. You have to also show wisdom. I think people nowadays, I think not just in Islamic organizations, but in companies and in politics, people understand that leaders have to come with a wealth of knowledge and wisdom about the state of the world and people. In fact, I think some historians have they've written about this theory that we have entered the age of wisdom, and that the last new age that we've had was actually the industrial age. And now we've left the industrial age and we have entered the age of wisdom. And before the industrial age, it was the age of agriculture. So there's one, or I don't know who it was, I don't remember, but he breaks down human history into 5 ages. And now we're in the age of wisdom. So you have to know your stuff, you have to know good instructions, you have to know work with, know how to work with people. So that's one. And then if you really want to, if you're managing people, you have to also show them respect. You have to treat them with dignity and understand that people don't want to be micromanaged. People want to be inspired. That's also a contributor to trust. And those are some of the things. I mean, there's so many books, right, written about, what kind of person you have to be to gain trust and to gain influence over people. Because at the end of the day, if people trust you and they see that you're credible, and they know that you are competent, then you have influence over them. And as John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls with influence or with leadership, and leadership is, at the end of the day, influence. So that's all I could say, really.
Just one point. Just for one point I want to add to that is just I think it's the striking the balance, right? It's a striking the balance between being catalyst for change, but also coping and be empathic. You as a leader have to be tough, but you also show be empathic listener. You need to be able to show the urgency, but also demonstrate that realism in your goals and objectives.
Definitely.
And really the people micromanage. Can you hear me? I think I'm cut off.
I think you're good now.
Okay. So I was just saying that as a leader, we need to have that win-win situation. We need to be able to balance the both side of things in order for us to. I'm looking at the time, so to say that let's move on to the second stage or the next part of that, which is basically what are the indicators of a successful phase 2?
Am I talking about this?
Yes.
Okay. So success in this phase involves, of course, not only having the data, the quantitative and qualitative data, and basically, I think a lot of the data that we have to gather as Islamic school leaders is a lot of qualitative data. We have to listen a lot to students, listen a lot to teachers, do focus group, do surveys, and just try to, try to summarize and infer a lot of things from this data, right? So you have that in the envisioning phase. You're ready. You know that you are being compelled and you're moving forward because you have the statistics to convince everybody that it's necessary. And two, you have educated a lot of people. You have educated parents, you have educated teachers, you've talked about it in your newsletters. You're right, a lot of people are already involved. They've attended a workshop, or they've brainstormed with you in the office. A lot of people are involved. And then accountability, right? You have assigned certain roles to people, and this is very important. In the envisioning phase, before you start implementing, you need to know who's responsible for what, right? And that could be one of your teachers, could be the committee lead for something, your principal assistant or vice principal, maybe it's a board member that's responsible for something, but you need to find an owner for any task and any category of work that needs to be done. So for instance, let's say in the example of Sister Aisha, about the social competence, who is it that's going to present some ideas about existing curriculum that we could look at that has to do with character education? Who is it that's going to raise the funds, right, to purchase this curriculum, right? As the leader, you have to sort of understand how you're going to hold those people accountable. When are you going to check in with them? How are you going to follow up with them? And even have some checkpoints on the calendar, right? Some milestones on the calendar, like, okay, deadlines. By this date, we need to have this. By that date, we need to have that. So that's another indicator of success. And then collaboration, right? There is people collaborating and talking. It shows up in meeting agendas, and you see that happening. And you've created the structure and the space, by the way, for collaboration to occur. So at our school, we have one day a month that's teacher collaboration, every last Friday of the month. Next year, inshallah, just realizing the amount of collaboration that is necessary in a bigger school, because we're going to become a K-12 school. We were K-8, K-7 6 years ago, and now inshallah we're going to a K-12. I realized more collaboration needs to happen, so I'm moving to a once a week, every Friday. We need a teacher collaboration. We need teams and departments to collaborate. So you have to also understand, like, create the space in your schedule, and don't let it happen, informally, because informal collaboration is not effective. You need to formalize collaboration and include it in your schedule and in your calendar. And those are indicators that you have, you're doing a good job at envisioning. Now, you're gonna move on to implementation. We're gonna move on to implementation. It doesn't mean that you're done with envisioning, right? You're gonna have to still maybe revisit, how do you hold people accountable? Revisit the data. How do you create more collaboration? Maybe involve new people that just came to your organization. Reteach them, right? You're gonna have to go back to preparation, where you're educating new people, you're teaching new people. It's very cyclical, and that's why sometimes we're burned out, right? Because this year, for instance, in our school, I had 11 new teachers, right? 11 new teachers. I had to start over in so many ways with them, back to education and onboarding and talking to them about the vision and trying to communicate a strong why all over again, right? And that's important, by the way. Just people want to be involved in a good cause. They want to be part of something important. And even though you've done it so many times and you've communicated a strong why and you try to rally people behind something noble and a good cause, you have to do it over and over again. It never stops. It's cyclical, right? And may Allah help.
Brother Bahim, such good points, because there are so many overlaps, because we talked about an initiative. Maybe there are multiple initiatives. So maybe one initiative could be in the envisioning stage, one envision could be in implementing stage. So there are so many initiatives that we need to kind of work on, some more bigger than the others. But I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking how we can make sure we want to really, present and really make sure that we have a strong case in our change leadership presentation. Our third, I'm going to briefly talk about phase through, because a lot of things we talked about is almost, like I said, cyclical, but implementation is basically a process where now your initiative is being implemented. It's an implementing stage where you are now reluctantly examining the data and assessing the effectiveness of the strategies that is underway, right? The change leader must be flexible and really adaptable to basically shift or redirect the initiative, because once you thought about the process going through, there will be multiple revisions. So be prepared for those revisions. And that's the time when you having that accountability piece strong really helps, because, for example, I was just mentioning about that horizontal and vertical accountability, where vertical accountability is the piece where the teachers and the people are holding accountable for themselves. And we are in this stage of envisioning, in the stage of implementing and enacting, then that's the time, then there is the leader gives the permission for obviously through collaboration, as we were talking about, being able to constantly be adaptive and be able to shift through the challenging phase of actually implementing the process. In our school, when we implemented the self-directed learning or the personalized learning model, yes, there are multiple revisions that we had to do. We had sent out several surveys to the teachers and the parents, and we were able to then revisit. So for example, one of the things where we need to be figured out that we need to be able to teach our students the self-directed learning cycle. One of the piece that is important for them to have that personalized model. So we went back to the drawing board. We trained the teachers, we trained the students to be able to do that, or the teachers to be able to do that coaching session, to be able to successfully implement a process where the teachers are talking to the students and be able to implement process where they're able to actually follow through the personalized learning model. So a lot of changes do happen, and it's a matter of, again, back to that trust, collaboration, and being able to be adaptive. I think this particular phase is more towards having to have that continuous monitoring process where you are following up and monitoring it. So whatever that doesn't get monitored, doesn't get done is probably the phase that I've known to do. So monitoring it, following up on it, and being able to kind of ready to adapt to new challenges. So yes.
Let's move on. Russ, real quick before we move on, part of this in implementation in the life cycle of a project or an initiative. Implementation is where you start seeing, you know, actual manifestations, right? Your procedures, routines, practices in the classroom, tangible evidence on the walls, reflection of the initiative in meeting agendas. So you start seeing manifestations of all of the groundwork that you've done, all of the ideation phases that you've done, and brainstorming and meetings and education. You start seeing it come to life here in the enacting phase. And you still have to see what's going well.
Yes. So, Brother Ibrahim, I am looking at the time, and again, I'm really open to suggestions because I have a really good video. I thought this video, we were going to watch this video, and we were going to go through this is about like an 8-minute video. So if we can go through this video and do that, or we can send out this video to all of you, and we can move on to the next phase. So you want to?
I just started.
So we can watch this video. Let me see if anybody thinks to continue. It's about, yeah.
When should we wrap up?
I'm not sure. Mr. Farah, can you give us some directions? Because if we were to watch this video and go through, we have 2 more slides and then we're done. It's going to take us about another 15 to 20 minutes. Mr. Farah, let us tell us.
I think we can go till 12:05. Remember, we have another meeting at 12:45. So, yeah, another 20 minutes should be, inshallah ta'ala. Okay.
Can you guys see my screen, the YouTube?
Okay.
Or do I have to start a new share? I probably have to start a new share, huh?
I can see the YouTube.
Oh, you can? Okay, perfect.
Yeah. And we can hear us. So yeah, I think this video is going to be helpful, and let's watch this video and then pause in between, Brother Ibrahim. And there's a question that is going to come up. Let's pause there and then kind of have a quick discussion, maybe 1 or 2 comments, and move on. So let's start with the video. Bismillah.
First job as a project manager. When I was a student.
You just have to go through the ad.
Hi, Carol. Hi. Enjoying your proper day so far? Certainly am, but it's a lot to take in though. Well, that's a good place to start. Yeah, that's right. Okay, now I'm off around the school for a bit. I'm going to see what's what, who's where, that sort of thing. So see you soon. No worries. Enjoy.
Brother Habib, can you pause a little bit?
Oh, hello. This looks interesting.
I just wanted to get a thumbs up if you're able to see the video, or is there any pauses in the video, or is it just me? I just wanted to know because I'm just kind of having some viewing difficulty. But okay, so Sister Sophia or Sister Farah said that that's fine. So please continue. It's just probably me. Continue on.
What's going on here? Hi, Carol. This is for our robotics club. Every year we have a robotics challenge competition. It's very popular. How fantastic. I can't wait to see what you all come up with here. Well, we filled the places already. I see. Do you have many girls sign up? Well, now that you mention it. Doesn't seem to be anything. Hello there. I'm your new principal.
Hi.
Nice to meet you all. You're all basketball players?
Yeah.
Huh. These are all basketball players too, I gather.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering why you're out here and there and there. Are you taking turns? No? Thank you. I've enjoyed it. Should maybe going that way?
Science club. So Kayla runs it after school every Tuesday.
Oh, any girls in the club?
Doesn't look like it.
No. So I realise joining you at the end of a school year like this, it's a bit different, but well, it's given me a really good opportunity to learn, you know, all about the school here. So hope it's been interesting. It has. It's been great. It certainly has. I've seen some really great stuff out there, but I have had just a few thoughts about our vision statement. We don't seem to be following through with our vision statement, particularly around equal opportunities, quite as well as I think we could.
Really?
So I'm thinking that during the holidays, I'm going to make just a few adjustments, strengthen just that part, and then start the new year with a launch. Yeah. So I'll keep you all posted. The school's vision is for all students to engage in a wide range of activities. The school's vision is for all students to engage in a wide range of activities to be the best they can be. And that's gone out to families today? Yeah. And she'd be interested to hear the students' comments. Good to have a bit more input. I know. Does that mean I have to change the list for the robot challenge?
But why would you change the competition list after they've already signed up?
Well, look, we're very keen that all of our students, girls included, have exactly the same opportunities.
Yes, but my Sam, he loves this stuff, and I'm not the only parent that's angry about this.
Do you want me to pause, Sister Azraf?
I think so. Why didn't approach work is a question that I wanted to know if anybody, or maybe you can think about it right now, just for a moment. And if you want to shout out, that's fine. But maybe we can just think about that. Her approach to implementing, she's a new principal here, right? She just came in through, and she's basically going around and learning the school, and had decided that there is a change that is needed in the vision. And she went ahead and made the change, and seems like not everybody is happy with that. So what's missing? So Ibrahim, do you want to have a quick stab at that, a quick one, and then we can kind of move on to see, because it'll show another approach to what she was going to do. Or we could just kind of start watching the video as well. That's fine. I'm just, again, my eyes on the time.
Hi, Kerry. Hi, it's good to hear from you. You always seem to call just at the right time.
Sometimes you actually need to refer to a critical friend.
Yes, I've got a bit of a situation, and I'd love a bit of advice.
You only see what you see, so sometimes it's really useful to talk to someone not so close.
I need to slow down a bit, don't I? Spend more time talking with families and the staff a bit. So I realise, coming in at the end of the year like this, it's a bit different. But I've certainly learned a lot about the school. So
creating a new vision and a new site, for me, it was about respecting the past.
I'm particularly interested in your vision and value statement.
Talking to the people who had been in the site for a long time.
Particularly with regard to the statements about equal opportunities.
Right, well, the development focus was a bit different back when that was put together.
There may be bits and pieces that you see straight up which you'd like to change, but it's important to sit back and evaluate what are the key areas required for change, and what levers you're going to pull to enact those changes. It's doing a scan and assess. It's taking in all the data that's available to you.
Spend some more time with the staff talking about this, and the students and families.
It might be the qualitative data which you get from surveys and student results, but also those snippets from your parents.
So that's what this activity is really about. I want you to really stop and think about, what does your ideal version of the school look like?
Certainly very valuable investing the time and having really thorough processes that are really inclusive.
You really need to take the time consciously to sit down and really identify your own values and your own non-negotiables yourself.
So is there anything getting in the way of the current vision, stopping it being realised?
The focus on extracurricular activities has been really good. We're still struggling with involving all students, and we're lagging a little bit behind in communicating with parents. So it's really important that people are a part of the process, and you've built that relational trust with people right from the beginning. Parent communication, where would you place that in the list of priorities?
Well, at the moment, quite highly.
And you find ways of working in a smaller group and then in a wider group?
I think there's a clearly reflecting a similar theme.
Using a collaborative approach to lead is going to be more beneficial. When you've got the time for that to be the case, that's excellent.
So from this feedback, it looks like we're revising the vision statement rather than starting again. And it needs to go to the board for endorsement in 3 months.
But there are times when, as a principal, you do need to come in and make a call, make a decision because something needs to change quickly.
Are you ready?
Yep. And action.
I like our school because of our multicultural environment. We also have many extracurricular activities at our school.
Once you have a clear direction, the most important role a principal can play is to keep communicating about that direction.
May, thank you so much for your thoughts about our school, particularly about our vision.
That's okay.
Look, I'm really interested to know if you would be interested in helping us with another little project that we've got going. We've got some students who are making a film to welcome new families into the school.
Well, if you don't involve a collaborative processes, you're at risk of alienating sections of your community, and that's when you start getting some resistance.
Your family, they've been here for quite a while.
4 years, yeah, 4 years.
One way of articulating, or a really important way, is to really show that through your actions and the modelling.
I'd love it if you and a couple of the other parents would just say a quick hi and welcome to the school.
Hollywood.
Yeah, why not?
And we also have choir, which is good because I like to sing.
You find champions in your school and you upskill them.
Your P&D plan has real focus on getting girls involved in STEM activities. How do you plan to get them involved?
I've been doing a bit of research.
If you're implementing a new process, vision, mission, values, it is essential to make sure that there are mechanisms in place to check what the progress is like on those.
Professional learning support, what do you think you'll need?
What takes us to the next stage, the next level, and what can we do to get there? Give the kudos where it needs to go, give the praise and give the feedback. When you've dealt with that and you're on to the next thing, each time you achieve a milestone, it's incredibly satisfying as principal.
Nice work.
Thank you.
So I think that let's pause here, or yeah, that's end of the video. So my suggestion is at this point, let's have a couple of shout outs, a couple of comments, and we can basically end here. So if I can have anyone unmute and share out your thoughts about how the earlier video where the new teacher had, or the new principal getting into the school had decided to have a change in the vision statement. How was the reaction by the others, and versus the second part of the video where there was something that caused that process to be successful? So I'm wondering if anybody can start off with that conversation.
I think sorry, I think I can totally relate to that. I mean, in my case, it wasn't the vision statement. In my case, it was, sort of, even though I've been a part of the school, but I am a new leader to them. And, I've always, I think they always sort of saw me as a colleague, a peer, and not, and then when I stepped into this role, it was very difficult. And I had, I had a vision. I had to work hard to prove it. But I also had to learn to kind of slow down the process and take in feedback. The good thing for me was, I already had a relationship with these teachers, but I had to make some very tough decisions to change the culture of the school. But I am glad. It was really bumpy and rocky in September, but many teachers have shared feedback with me, and it took a lot of courage on their part to let me know that yes, we were uncomfortable with some of the changes you are making. However, we do see that, we do see that this is good for the school. So, but I still have to slow down because, you know, I have to, I want it to be collaborative and sort of a win-win. But that was one of the big things I had to learn, to kind of slow down, communicate more clearly, you know, be involved in the work, and to kind of always reassure them that this is good for all. It's not just my agenda, my objective. It's not about me. It is about us as a school. And what is really nice is I'm also getting a lot of support from the community. But yes, I would say the biggest thing is to communicate and slow down and always involve collaboration and ask for feedback, even though I may know that I will still have to do this, but as long as they're sort of involved in the process, alhamdulillah.
Yeah, mashallah. I think maybe speaking of collaboration and the importance of collaboration and involving others, maybe I can conclude with a story, almost a funny story, I would say, about a brewing company. This brewing company, they invented a new way to can their product, and this new invention allowed them to start distributing to supermarkets around the city. They started distributing, but the distribution manager was a little stressed out about the way they distributed stuff. So they had a huge meeting, and they brought in previous distribution managers, his predecessor, as well as the one before his predecessor. And while they were talking just about the distribution, the present day distribution manager, he said, you know, I'm a little frustrated with the way we distribute to our supermarkets. All of our long distance distribution happen on Monday and Tuesday, and then our local distribution happens on Thursday and Friday. And it's just not efficient. It's not an efficient way to distribute and to organize our drivers when it comes to distribution. And then his predecessor, the guy that was there 30 years ago, he said, you know what, it was the same thing during my days. And and it was also an inconvenience. Our trucks would drive out long distances on Monday and Tuesday, but then they would drive out short distances on Thursdays and Fridays. And that was the school. I mean, sorry, that was the policy of the company, this distribution system. And then finally, the original distribution manager, who was there 60 years prior, he said, you know what, it was the same thing on my days, but we used horses back then. And on Mondays and Tuesdays, the horses would travel long distances, but on Thursdays and Fridays, they would travel short distances because they were tired. So we kept all of our local distribution systems on Fridays because the horses were tired. And that system stayed in place. And if it hadn't been for the involvement of others and talking to previous people, and the policy wouldn't have ever changed. And they finally changed the policy. So they changed their distribution policy. Anyway, that was a story about the importance of collaboration and involving others.
Does anybody have any other comments? So as the story of the new principal and Brother Ibrahim's story does mention that we need to be a more collaborative community. We need to know that the problem that we are facing could be something that something that cannot be maybe solved more better if there is a synergizing with other people. We might come to a third alternative that is much more better than one that we originally thought about. So so really getting that involvement, somebody is involved in the play, that they will try their best to make sure that they uphold that vision. So if the mission and vision is being revised with so many people involved, and giving their involvement in providing their feedback to it, are the one who's going to rally with you. That they're successful. So very, very important lesson, I think, is to be able to, involvement, communication, and
Right. We lost you for a second.
In the beginning of the training, we talked about adapting and the technical issues and what have you. So alhamdulillah, we're experiencing firsthand on how we adapt to this change in Sister Ezra's session. But alhamdulillah, any final thoughts, Brother Ibrahim or Sister Ezra, before we conclude this
If
session?
anyone has any questions or they would like to mention any challenges that they might have, and we'd be more than happy to share, to share our thoughts.
So thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Go ahead.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
First of all, Jazakumullah khair. This is a really great session. I loved it. And alhamdulillah, this is an opportunity to grow on many levels. I just wanted your feedback, Brother Ibrahim. Inshallah, hopefully Sister Azra come back also. We can hear from her. Stephen Covey, you mentioned him. And he talks about a difference between leadership and management. Not to say that one function is more important than the other, but there are two different functions. Now, I am aware that principals, have so much on their plate. So I would like to hear from you, like maybe in addition to delegation, what could be, other strategies that principals can do to have some time. I read many research papers actually talking about the same point, that one of the things that principals and leaders in general, they have to delegate some of the management part or do something with it so they can have some time for the leadership role. Thank you. Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward you greatly, all of you.
Ajma'in, inshallah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the leadership positions, especially in the current century, there is a balance between we need to be having more managerial section of the responsibility as leaders, as principal, as well as the leadership, as well as a leadership section. And one of the things that's most important for the leader is to be an instructional coach. Right? The most of the time we spend in the classroom where the magic really happens, we are more supportive to our teachers, because I think it is the most important, that is the most important place where we can really, and grow the school. So I feel, and again, I'm in a situation where I don't have an assistant principal. But I need to be able to decide, okay, what are the things that, almost like a technical challenge, the technical to my administration, the technical challenge, I'm able to communicate my administration, while I'm able to be in the classroom doing the observations, doing the things that a leader should do, and being able to step back and look at the policies and procedures. And because the difference between a leader and an administrator is that administrator and the manager is just he or she does the work that it needs to be done. But the leader is someone who steps back and questions the process, questions why it is happening. So for example, Brother Ibrahim's a question or example, that person says, why are we doing this way? When we evaluate the situation, why, then only we can come up with new and better solutions to move on.
Yeah, I would also, I agree that the educational, as principals, we are first and foremost instructional leaders, and we are stewards of the curriculum. So a lot of our priorities on any given day should center and revolve around instructions and instructional improvement. That's one. But again, when it comes to delegating some of the managerial work, I know that a lot of schools, they don't have the budgets to hire and form positions. Public schools, they have that luxury of having counselors and and just coordinators and coaches, and right, they have that luxury to create a position based on their needs. We don't, because of our budgets. So often you have to play both roles. You as Islamic school principals, we're not just instructional leaders. We're kind of the CEOs of our buildings, and we have to play that role, but always make time and make space for instructional improvement and relationship building. I think those two things should always be a priority, and hold teachers accountable to both instructions and relationships with students and with families. But unfortunately, we don't have that luxury of a lot of tasks. We have to wear those many hats. We have to be, we have to know a little bit about finance. We have to be the financial officer in certain times. We have to order curriculum. We have to review the inventory. We have to be facility managers and maintain the property. It's just part of the job, I think. I don't know if that helps, Brother Zaid.
Well, with that, we would like to conclude our session. I'm hoping that this was helpful and some inspiring for you as leaders to go back to the field and be able to implement some of the strategies. So, well, I would like to end the session with a dua. Brother Ibrahim, you want to maybe end with a dua and we'll end up the session?
Sure, of course. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us always counsel each other with patience and counsel each other with the truth, inshallah.
جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم.
آمين.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
وعليكم السلام.